Hello, everyone. This is Kurt and Brad. It's Saturday, July 1st. Tomorrow's my birthday. I don't know how old I'm going to
Hey,
be.
happy birthday, Kurt.
Um, so we're Brad and I are talking because we've actually been talking for an hour. So Brett and I are talking about the challenges. Challenges is an interesting phenomenon in the medical industry, which we talk about pretty often. And of course, I've built a business consulting and technology consulting business and marketing. So this stuff is all fascinating to me. And we were just talking about how the hospitals have the Boeing problem. And I was that made Brad laugh because he understands the Boeing problem. And for those who don't know, it's that
Wait, I have to tell you why I laugh because it's categorical mathematics. You illustrate so much when you say the Boeing problem. It describes a category of administrative errors.
Mhm.
Sorry, that was for the audience.
Thank you. And so what happens is that in a company like Boeing, and you realize that I'm from the Seattle area, right? So, Boeing, Weyerhaeuser, Microsoft, all these companies, right? They're all up there. And so they all have their different corporate cultures. And now we've got the Google culture there and the Amazon culture, right? So these are cultures. And like if you're in Connecticut or Massachusetts, you've got the leftover GM culture, right? We've still got the Pratt and Whitney culture with the GM, and Boston has the Harvard and MIT culture, etc. So I mean, different organizations develop different cultures, and I'll get to in a minute. But the point about Boeing is that what you notice is they buy everything, they do everything, but based on the same risk criteria. So the process they used to buy like toilet paper and paper towels is as burdensome and expensive as the process they use to buy electronic parts. I mean,
this has to be illustrated a little further because it's like airplane parts are like individually tested to an extent that is just outrageously expensive. It's like the screw that you buy for $1 in the hardware is
right.
50,
Right.
because it's been tested ad nauseum and they know exactly when it's going to break.
Right. And so that's why airplanes are a pretty safe way to travel. Stupidity aside, they're pretty amazing.
Thanks for leaving room for stupid. There's always room for stupid.
It's human error. I mean, you follow, what's his name? The guy I follow that's basically he's better than it's escaping me. It's like it's disturbing how much talent is outside the industries because they're not bound by internal culture. So this guy, I can't remember his name right now. So I follow him because he reports on every single plane crash, right? And it's all human error. In my family, it's motorcycles because we do funerals, right? So in my family, you learn very quickly that people die of motorcycles all the time because they're idiots, right? I mean, they're
that's not quite right. That's not quite right, because it's like people are idiots everywhere.
Yeah, well,
the issue is that the margin for tolerance of stupid mistakes is smaller on the bike.
Exactly, that's what I was trying to get to. Sorry, you did a jump.
I'm pulling a Brandon.
You pulled a Brandon on me. So I'm trying to create an arc, and you jumped.
Sorry. Oh, that was rude.
What?
That's the mic drop right there. Kurt, I was drawing a beautiful arc, and it was going to be just.
It wasn't a beautiful arc. You're perfectly welcome to interrupt me on those. But the one that I have to juggle like planets in my head, those I don't like. But anyway, the problem in the medical industry is very similar. Is the administrative cost of all sorts of things is way beyond the value provided by the administrative overhead. And so you get so hospitals are run by the Boeing problem is that, and this is this is a systemic problem, which Brad was trying to get to. Just as you said, people are always, we're all stupid, right? I mean, in some context,
we're going to do dumb stuff.
right? We do that. Well, that's because computationally we can only do so much at once, and sometimes we get in a situation where the computational density of the problem is greater
Right,
than the,
swamps you.
right. And
Yeah.
so, if you're thinking about the fight you just had with your ex on the way riding your motorcycle, and when so you have got co-processing that is not available for what you should be doing the entire time you're in a motorcycle, is who is trying to kill me that I can't see, right? Which is how you drive a motorcycle, right?
Right.
You drive paranoid. You drive down the road. If you can't see something, there is someone there driving that is going to hit you, right? They are trying to hit you. And if you drive like that, well, it's like driving around Boston. People really are trying to hit you. But anyway, but in general, so lots of traffic. Anyway, Boston people, not nice, not good people, not nice. Anyway, so you what happens is that you get this problem of overload, which is a lot what you and I talk about, right? We talk about lying as a process of producing an overload that causes us to rely on instinct and intuition instead of judgment and reason, right? Well, the same thing happens in companies, right? Companies develop a criteria of decidability. We call it company culture. What does that mean? It's a system of decidability. What's religion? A system of decidability. Now, the problem with anything like religion is overgeneralization. The problem with company cultures is overgeneralization. The one I had to fight at Microsoft is they started out with the culture of thinking everybody is stupid. We have to make computers accessible to them. And they come out with this something like Microsoft Bob and the paperclip and other stupid shit like that. And of course it all fails. Why? Because people adapted, the population adapted to computers faster than the corporate culture adapted to the changes in the population. And if I were to, my long career consulting with that company is reducible to trying to solve that problem from the outside. Right? I mean, if you understand, that's really was their problem. This isn't Satya's issue. This was a Gates Ballmer culture issue. Because they were really proud of themselves, those kids. They thought they were smarter than the average person, right? And I mean, we started out, we're hiring, 300 people, right, at Microsoft originally, right? I mean, so it's not like you got into thousands fast, but in this culture stuck. And so, but I can, it's like Frito-Lay's the opposite way, is that they think about Frito-Lay culture, they actually think about that fucking delivery driver. Right? They think about that guy. It's amazing, but they actually, well, I mean, I haven't done business with Frito-Lay PepsiCo in over 10 years, so I can't say what it's like today, but at the time, just to use them as an example, that's what they thought. Well, the same problem in the hospital businesses, and it's exacerbated by the fact you have very smart doctors and very not smart staff. Can I say that without offending too many people? But we actually know about this in the IQ business, as the problem between doctors and staff is the average staff that works in clerical function is in the mid 90s, and the average doctors in the mid 120s, right? And so there is a two standard deviation gap, which is the limit of communication.
Right. So this is kind of funny because the issue it comes down to this is, so the hospital hires staff and they manage the staff. They don't let us manage the staff. And it's like the staff will do what you tell them to do pretty reliably. And it's like, the instructions have to be pretty explicit. Yeah. And there's no you cannot handle exceptions.
This is one of my fascinating observations, because a lot of doctors branch out, like you have, into academic interest because they have the intellectual capacity. And so, especially when I was working with libertarians, there are a lot of doctors who would specialize in some particular medical issue, that they were basically private researchers, self-funded private researchers in something. They published papers, and I was always surprised at the quality of their work, right? So you get out there. I'm running with this somewhere. Anyway, so the sorry, I started to go down a rat hole with of admiration for it. So you have that kind of person. Now he's got to work with every day a person he has to communicate with on a normie level. And that started to, what I started to see was that was framing the doctor's view of social science, not medical science.
Yeah, what do you mean by that?
Is that doctors tend to be aware of this problem more than other educated professions.
That's because they're not bubbly insulated.
They're not bubble insulated, right? And so I started to notice this, and I'm like, why? And for me, I'm like, well, frankly, I'm quite a bit smarter than your average doctor. So I mean, I'm like, okay, well, why is this guy who's smart coming to better conclusions than my peers? Because he's got better evidence.
That's an interesting observation, because it's like, my father would complain a lot. And one of the complaints that he didn't complain a lot, but one of the ongoing complaints that he had was that at a cocktail party or whatever social gathering, the people will listen to the doctor but not the professor.
It's true.
And it's like this. I said, and I come to the conclusion, it's like the professor's used to dealing with a captive audience.
That's right.
That's all.
You had just jumped ahead again.
Oh my! That was an accidental arcing.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. So that's what you notice. Is what I notice with academics is some of them they're much better speakers than I tend to be, but then I've had to deal with the spectrum, right? And so to me, it's like, who the fuck am I talking to? Right. I don't get out there, right? I mean, and the second thing is that the students, they're not only captive audience, they have to please you.
Yes.
Right. Whereas, like, I'm trying to get a $5 million check from you. Right.
That's a little different.
It's a very different conversation, right? And the other thing is that the professors are bound by the cathedral.
Yes.
Right. And I was Brad and I were talking about this yesterday, because it's not entirely intuitive. Is that I swear to God, I got paid mostly for telling uncomfortable truths.
Right.
And I think that was one of the strategic advantages of our business, other than if we say it's going to cost 200 grand and it's going to cost between 190 and 210 grand. It's not going to cost 300. It's just
right.
never going to happen.
Right.
Then if it is, I will eat it.
Yes.
Right. So, because that's why you hire me, right? You hire me because I guarantee it will be right, but I also guarantee I'm going to tell you the shit you don't want to hear.
That's it.
That's the deal, right? And so that's an incredibly effective business strategy, by the way.
Yes.
Especially when you're dealing with relatively competent people, because that's not the business strategy. Most people, they just want your money, right?
Oh my.
Right. Which is really interesting as a closing point. My other point is that I would frequently tell people I don't want your business, which just makes them want you to take your business, which gives you some leverage, which is that I need to be able to tell you the truth. Yeah. Right. All right. Anyway, so back to the issue here is that, you listen to doctors, right? Why? Because they're actually talking and there's difference between empiricism and evidence.
Yes.
And we the difference is empiricism is an abstraction of individual experience, whereas evidence is a generalization of individual experience. Does that make sense? Say
it again.
Empiricism is like mathematical measurements, right? Yeah. It's the accumulation of evidence that that overcomes the problem of subjective valuation. Whereas evidence includes the subjective evidence, so subjective information, so judgment. So a doctor works from when he's talking about people, he's talking from evidence, but he's talking from a lot of evidence. It's not just, I just had an argument with a woman on Twitter this morning, and I was like, what you're calling is knowledge or education is idiosyncratic experience, right? Which basically means we're all subject to selection bias, and we're always engaged, and most of us are, especially women, are engaged in a false consensus bias. In other words, their desire for empathy makes them believe that there's greater similarity between minds than exists, right? Partly because they do it. Well, men operate by falsification, which is that we see dissimilarities, right? And so we compensate, and that allows us to solve problems, and it allows women to avoid problems. So, so in any event, I'm getting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Does that make sense?
Writing it down in my book, it was just men solve problems, women avoid problems.
Well, they avoid it's social problems, interpersonal social problems. Like you and I can have a conflict, and once it's over, it's fine, right?
It doesn't mean anything.
Doesn't mean anything. But with women, it sticks like, tar and feathering. It just doesn't come off, and they never forget the thing, right? Yeah. So that's why they're so petty with one another.
Because you made me feel bad.
Yeah. But so I'm sorry, I don't want to go down too far to rat hole, because I already got myself distracted from the path.
We were talking about empiricism, which includes the subjective.
So this is why you want to listen to a doctor rather than an academic, is because he's working from.
He doesn't include the subjective enough.
Right, for the
process the information properly
for the
circumstance.
Right, and
because the way it looks in the clinic is the patient says, well, what's the average for how fast does it take for this to go away? And it's like,
there is no average in people.
Not for you. It doesn't. I said the average doesn't matter to you because it only matters when it goes away on you, and that has nothing to do with any average.
I asked that question differently. Is like, what are the most uncommon? And they don't want to tell you that, right? So anyway,
so it's the issue is this it's math education in the office, and I find it amusing because it's kind of rude.
Explain to them who and what I am, and then right. I'm like, look, this is who I am, and this is what I do. I'd rather you tell me than me go look it up and get it wrong. So why don't you just tell me? So so anyway, so what are we getting back to? We're getting back to, so this is why you do it. Now, on the other hand, and so the other criticism, and I've been a victim of this criticism, right? So is that there's a tendency for people who try to develop systems to get hooked on the system that's false, for the exact reasons that the physician doesn't get hooked, or the guy who fixes cars in a garage doesn't get hooked, or a plumber who fixes plumbing, or an electrician or a lineman, right? Is that you're continuously face to face with the totality of the information rather than the generalization of the information. Does that make sense? So one of the things that this has challenged you and I, or our team, is that someone will say to me, well, you can't, you academics always over systematize, and then you engage in fitting. I'm like, actually what we do is we prevent fitting. Right, that's what our goal is. All right, I mean, one of our goals is to prevent fitting. Now, fitting is a really nice term for trying to have the data fit the model, because the model is what you've invested in.
Right.
But we sought for decidability. This is way too complicated for some people, but I'm going to try it anyway.
We're going to do it anyway.
right? So we sought for decidability. What's decidability? It's when we get to a first principle. In other words, we've exhausted the options. So we didn't look for a good
What
or a
option?
model. The
Wait.
model emerged from the pattern of seeking first principles.
Okay.
And so we end up with the method that we use prevents us from fitting. One of the problems we have with people joining and following us is that they try to get one or two or three principles down and then fit everything to the principle.
Oh,
We have to say to them, you're fitting, right? Because if you can't enumerate the dimensions, you can't test the dimensions. And if you can't enumerate and test the dimensions, you don't know whether you're fitting or not. So what we do is it's geometry, right? It's just like geometry. It's just measurements and whether your measurements are within bounds of the criteria, right? And so
right.
we try to prevent fitting. So can I explain? It's like, but you can't explain what we're doing and how it solves the problem until the person has enough facility with what we're doing to comprehend it. Or in some cases where the people are, they're enough in physics or multidisciplinary. Physics, mathematics, and economics would be a really great combination, right? Math, physics, and economics is pretty awesome combination to avoid fitting. Because what happens if you learn just math? You tend to engage in mathematical fitting, which is what we call mathiness. What happens when you learn physics? You tend to engage in the mathematics of physics, not metaphysical reality, right? You're trying to use that's a fitting.
Yeah.
You're fitting to your tool set. When we talk about economics, we have the problem of the classicals who are trying to fit people into equilibria when it's actually we go to disequilibria until we fail and then we regress to equilibria. Then you had the Keynesians came out and they tried to do fitting to the ISLM model. And I'm like, okay, well, that failed, right? And some of us are sitting here.
It's still in process, brother.
I think we were pretty confident as libertarians, and Austrians, that we had made our point in 2008. By 2010, we were right. We said the Austrian method is now fully integrated into the mainstream, which means mainstream is effed because it has nowhere to go now. Right.
Yeah, but it's just like this, the wheels haven't finished breaking.
Well, you can't spend that many years in an economy screwing things up that create basically vast informational momentum that's stored in people's heads and expect it to correct,
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Right, but it's like it's an amazingly big machine that's crashing around our ears.
Yeah, well, the post-war. So here's the post-war theory.
Yes.
Can we end the age of empires? Well, if we had sent Patton into Russia and sent MacArthur into China, we would have ended the age of empires.
There's a T-shirt, Kurt. The Black Swan. Patton was right.
Well, Patton and MacArthur were both right, is they were trying to end the age of world island empires. Who's talking? Oh, Stephen Kotkin's out on a rant about this right now.
Wait, who's this?
Stephen Kotkin. Kotkin. And he wrote a great book called Tribes, which is one of my favorites, which is how groups of smart subgroups, basically diasporics, form tribes and how they affect the world, basically focusing on the Chinese, the Jews, and the Europeans. Anyway, interesting. So you had this attempt to end the world island, right? Because those world islands, they've got thousands of years of pride stored up in a model that's dead. The dead model is that territory was the means by which you crossed and traded, except the cost of shipping by water, which is invented by the Europeans. It's just you can't compensate for it. There's no land version of compensating for water. There's no equivalent to it. And so the naval powers they view like Russia and China, somewhat now, when India's now getting there, which is natural, is they're getting to the point where they say, well, we were kings, right?
Oh God,
we was kings.
Didn't expect that, Kurt. So you told me this was acting. There's acting here, and it's like that was beautiful because it was unexpected.
The healthier I
Kings, it is. So it's the pride of the civilization that is now brought to global stage.
Because they realize what happened. It's a natural progression. They see the opportunity created by modernity, but it turns out that their cultures and demographics aren't capable of doing it. And so it's natural. What would they do? Just like a conservative goes back to, well, we should go to the past. Just like a Marxist we should go back to Marx, right? These are, or the religious people, we should go back to Christianity, right? I mean, that's what people do when they realize they've hit the wall. They look for an answer. Well,
they doubled down.
They double down. Right. And so they double down on what previously worked because they've exhausted the opportunities of modernity. Now, Russia's going to fail because you can't, it's just an economically deterministic phenomenon of the land is not profitable enough, right? And they have not enough rivers, and they don't have enough sea travel to be able to maintain that empire with the populations that they used to produce from subsistence farming. In other words, Russia could do what it did because it had a lot of poor farmers. That's it. That's all. Right. And poor farmers were conquering very small indigenous populations who were small indigenous populations because the land is shit. I mean, Siberia is shit. I mean, it's really,
poor quality land.
Poor quality land. Where's all the good land? It's down in Ukraine and the southern Russia. It's over in Ukraine and Poland. It's in specifically in France, and it's the whole fucking Mississippi basin and east of the United States.
Yes. Oh.
And then you have the strip along the Chinese coast and the strip along northern India, and that's all adjacent to rivers. Why? Because you have to have rivers for agrarian production. You have to have rivers to keep the price of transport to something that's within this is way too sophisticated, but within the marginal capacity of an individual human to produce a surplus. I shouldn't have gone there. I try really hard not to nerd out, but it still happens.
It's okay. Don't be apologetic for it, Kurt.
If I'm not apologetic and I don't call myself out, somebody else will call me out.
Somebody has to do it.
I'm taking it off the table.
I want those people to be tasked.
Oh God. So we didn't kill the world island, and so they're doing what they would normally do. And Calkins came back and said hunting wasn't right. I'm like, you're wrong. Hunting was right.
Huntington into the Clash of Civilizations.
Correct. He's one of my. It's really Huntington and Fukuyama. Those are the two I sort of work with. Fukuyama is great at history, bad at prediction, and Huntington, who was his mentor, is great at history and prediction.
Okay.
Great contribution that I feel that Fukuyama made isn't necessarily his histories. It's his book Trust. I think Trust is the most important book he wrote, and other people they disagree because they don't understand how important that property is.
Put it in there for the audience. I put it in my book because I'm listening to what Kurt says. That's the keys. Those are the 3 key books that I'm going to get. I'm going to put them in my little library.
I was over there the Rudyard the other day. Is that the number of books you have to read to produce these little bits of knowledge that can eventually fit puzzle pieces. It's really high, right? I mean, it's now what we've done is we've reduced it to first principles.
Yes.
So now we can explain it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can get from the first principles to understanding without the narratives to explain the different contexts. Does that make sense? You sort of need to have. It's
right,
like the same thing.
I have to tell the audience what I think that meant. Okay. Which is that the first principles will not tell you how the history went in various localities around the world.
Yeah, it won't give you an example.
It can't do that. It's particulars for explaining that what you see, what you find out in the history, it explains why it did that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't go the other way.
Right.
So you can't.
Here's the way I describe the science. I said you have a narrative, which is search criteria, and you have a formula, which is falsification criteria. And you have to have two sides of the coin. And so why is physics lost? It doesn't have a narrative. It only has a formula. Right. So you have what a narrative does is captures the operational and causal effects of a context. And then you have the formula, which is a system of measurement to falsify it. And that's what a science requires both. And so when you look at history as a science, or the history of human behavior, or social science, behavioral sciences in general, what you need is the first principles, and the formula, which is a continuous recursive disambiguation of entropy into mass. And then you have the narratives, which are historical examples, which explain the application of those to every given context. And that's why I tell people, despite Rudyard, I have an aristocratic view and Rudyard has a more priestly view, right? I'm thinking about, how do I manage this stuff? Right, is how I think about it from aristocracy. How do I govern?
Right.
And he tends about it, is how do people navigate history? He's brilliant at it. That's why he's
I don't know. I'd like, well, say what that is again. So how do people?
He can step into the mind of anybody in any place on Earth in all of history.
That's pretty impressive.
And tell you what their life was like and how they viewed the world. That's what his miracle is. That's his real talent. And
what a crazy thing! It's an empathic.
He actually has a world model of history in his head. Now it's not from like my view, which is why I say he's always right. Right, but he's looking at it from a different side, the other side of the triangle. Right. I'm trying to say, well, I mean, this is all that, but we both use limit-based criteria. So we both use limit-based reasoning. So it's just a class difference. And we only came to this conclusion this week when we were talking on an
very interesting.
And I've said it before, I think you think more like a priest, but that's really what it is. He said, well, it's good that we can have these differences. We're not having a difference. I agree with you on everything. I'm just saying that my position, the viewpoint I take, is from somebody who has to rule.
But anyway, it's interesting. It's operational. It's an operational difference.
Experiential versus operational, right? So the only thing, like, what I love about him is he understands, he values religion a lot, or I view it as a practical system of weights and measures. But he actually sees it from the individual standpoint at any point in time as their
guidance. It's like what a weird thing. It's like he understands the value of value functions over time in various contexts.
Right. And that's, and I keep saying, well, that he's not only always pretty much always right. And the only time, and it's like, I never disagree. I said, well, I just would look at it I would rotate the cube or the slightly, but I would say, yes, from that perspective, that's actually correct. So what you end up with is a slightly more subjective view of history and a slightly more objective view of history from me, which overlap perfectly. I mean, he's the one person I can talk to where I'm like, boy, he's just never wrong, ever, right? Ever. And I know he takes stuff from me too, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I mean, it's not a one-way relationship.
Right.
So how did I get there? So
narrative is search criteria, formula is falsificationary.
Right. So you have to have both of those to make a science. And that's one of the problems with the scientific. It's like I said, I saw the scientific method, but it's very different from what is but the reason this philosophers and scientists can't explain the scientific method is because they know what they do, but they don't know why it works. And so I just try to explain why it works.
That's funny.
It's because it has, in other words, I explain it as Karl Popper called it verisimilitude, and I call it evolutionary computation. Right, I mean this. Because he didn't have the idea of computation when he was working. It was not available.
But it is an interesting innovation. Because it's like it is an interesting innovation. The premise of evolutionary computation is an innovation in thought, and it's no small thing. It's no small thing, and it is the issue is this, that we're going back to the Boeing problem, so that to see how this arcs back, isn't that special? It's the Boeing problem is the overinvestment in cultural relics that are not productive or counterproductive.
Relic. What did Pareto call them? Something's in derivations. Pareto something in derivations. Pareto called.
Are you looking it up on the chat GTP?
I can't believe it's not coming to my head. It's just like one of those things where I'm thinking about something else now. For me to go find that in my head is another place.
I understand.
You know what I found is that I don't use just one of these AI, right? I have like one of my magic tabs with all these AIs on them because they're all good for different things. It's residues and derivations.
Okay.
And so a residue refers to enduring, consistent, and largely unchanging physical, psychological characteristics and instincts that drive human behavior. And derivations are the justifications or rationalizations that individuals use to explain their actions.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Anyway, so we took
so the derivations are the verbal representations or narrative representations, and the residues are the psychological scars.
Right. Think of it as the same thing as Jungian archetypes as a residue, and all the stuff we do that results is a derivation.
Okay.
All our justifications are derivations.
Yeah.
Would we be able to? I don't know. You start, once you start seeing, the fundamental pattern to the universe, you start seeing the patterns that weren't previously obvious. Things that look different, they're not different anymore, right?
So we're doing that categorical math.
Right.
Category math. It's like,
hope Michael's younger than I am, so hopefully he lives long enough to and can work on the work long enough to produce the category theory about it. I mean, because the stuff he's writing in the offline channels, the offline forum on math, I mean, he's got it. He completely understands how to operationalize or in other words, make math real again. He said one yesterday that I thought was particularly insightful. Oh, he was covering again. One of our arguments I always make is that the number line isn't real, right? I mean, it's a artificial thing we make up. It's a dimension we add to numbers, right? And that the negative sign for a number, well, there's no -1. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4. There's only
right.
Negative is just a direction,
right?
Or a direction or a debt indicator, right? Or whatever you want, whichever context you want. So we disambiguate these things into their causal properties, we take mathematics from being this thing that seems very unintuitive to people. Yeah, we create it into intuition.
Right.
But what's happened over time, because while until Pareto, not Pareto, Jesus Christ, sorry, Pareto's on my screen there. I said Pareto. Until Descartes re-Europeanized mathematics, whereas in the Semitic world, in the Indian world, the mathematics was linguistic, and so we brought that into Europe with linguistic mathematics. Whereas the Greeks were not linguistic; they were actual measurements done with problem solving with shapes.
Yes.
And so we went from then we re-verbalized it with mathematical symbolisms, right? Symbols, which it's easier to remember math symbols, right? But they're a problem in that they convert it back to a language.
Yes.
Whereas what we've done recently, and what Michael and I are trying to do, is turn mathematics back into a science from a philosophy or verbal method. We're trying to just the same thing we're trying to do with physics. We're trying to reground physics like Descartes did in space and time. We're trying to reground physics, space and time, and Michael and I are trying to reground mathematics in space and time. We just have to produce enough of this nonsense so the next 5 generations can produce PhDs on the subject and cure the mysticism that's emerged in the. Well, really, it emerged because the Industrial Revolution happened too fast, and really the causal problem is the failure for. This is why thinkers matter. The failure of Babbage to take his insight and to generalize it. And instead of, he was so worried about building these machines that he didn't either understand or know how to communicate or focus on communicating, that he had converted mathematics from a verbal to a real mechanical computation. And that was so profoundly important, and it would have prevented all the nonsense that happened in philosophy in the latter half of the 19th century. And it happened all the way up to the middle of the 20th.
I think it's resin. It's the amber of the age is the residues and derivations that we're all stuck in.
Correct.
And so it's like to overcome that individually it clearly was over his head.
Well, let's try to anchor this in this beautiful little arc here. Is that we talked about civilizations, like China and Russia. They built their entire history, their pride, their self-image on the virtue of the world island, Eurasia, right? And all of a sudden, some little upstarts in England and Netherlands, they invent the age of sail because the Turkish
Muslims, the Middle Easterners were too irritating.
And so I said, well, F you. We're just going to sail around y'all. Not only did they do that, but they conquered another world island, the American continents, and exploited that. And then we made the Silk Road, which had been the world islands equivalent of the seas, irrelevant, because there's just no way that long pathway through brigands and tribes and
so it's interesting to look at it as an obsolescent technology.
Correct. And so the problem was, of course, that Islam was so regressive that they weren't able to adapt.
Okay.
And so what's happening is, of course, is that these countries, the last one to double down is India, but Africa is going to double down too. So we had Russia double down, China double down, India is now doubling down, Africa is now doubling down. And of course, I hope we double down, because we double down, do what is happening in France and Germany right now, which is saying this immigration thing isn't working. The same.
Wait, I want you to know something. This is very funny to me, which is I had the exact same intuition as to what this conversation must do now is talk about what's happening in France right now.
Okay, well, let me finish my arc and we can go there.
Wow.
But so what are people in America doing? They're doubling down.
Yes, sir.
Right? Why? But because we've all exhausted the opportunity of modernity. Because we're not, there's nobody left here that's in other words, the only thing we have left to consume is signals. The only thing we have left to earn is stress reduction. Well, these other countries, these archaic worlds, when they double down on a failed structure. That's why China's trying to build the Belt and Road Initiative. Never going to be cost effective enough for any purpose whatsoever. And we fail to recognize that the world island still has a problem. Is that you have the Europeans through the Russians on the west, and you have the Chinese people and the East Asian people to the east, and you have the Indian people to the south. And you have these universal terrorists we call Islam in between, right? Especially in the more primitive sections up in the north, which is the Turkish ones. And so we're telling them you need to be like us when they can't be. We got surrounded by oceans. We're right, and so you can't be. Russia needs to be an empire. It just needs to be an empire over the undomesticated people, not the domesticated people. China needs to be an empire. It needs to be an empire over the undomesticated people, not the domesticated people. Why is it that they want to be an empire over the domesticated people instead of be an empire over the undomesticated people? I frankly don't have I'm not fond of how they're dealing with the Uyghurs, but I have no problem with them getting rid of Islam. It's a cancer. It's certainly a cancer for Chinese civilization. It's cancer for every civilization. Evidence is overwhelming because it mandates and excuses ignorance and irresponsibility. What's the matter? What do you give me that face for? You're chuckling in the background there.
Just, I'm like, how's the AI say you're doing? You haven't cussed in a while. I think that's good.
Oh, okay. Right. Well, so now let's go back to how you were. I was trying to create the point that we screwed up in the 1830s with Babbage not solving this problem led to the century of pseudoscience.
You find this to be rather rude. You're rather rude to Mr. Babbage. It's like, hey, Babbage, how come you didn't fix this problem that I have to deal with? So
yeah, exactly.
Centuries later,
I have no
I'm a
problem
little bit annoyed.
If I can blame Einstein for getting it half wrong and starting all this problem, I can Cantor for doing the same. I can blame Babbage for getting it right and not doing much about it.
Okay.
All right. So I mean,
it's okay. Right. It's okay. I'm just having a little fun, and
I know what you're doing.
The issue is this is like, so I've been watching it's like, so I will tell the audience, since I didn't tell them I didn't tell you when we were recording, which is that the last 4 days I've been unable to do my online work. So I've been looking at the Twitter more or whatever, different news feeds, because I'm not working, because I'm not allowed to work because I got locked out by bureaucracy, which is.
Brad's just saying one of his licenses didn't clear.
No, it's even worse. It's the corporation needed a checkbox that I did a 1-hour class, which I did on the first day, but it took them 4 days to turn it over and make the checkbox effective for me, which is fine.
So you had a 4-day vacation.
I'm so not built for that. I'm a workhorse. I'm like pulling a draft animal, pulling the thing, and it's like, whoa, there's got to be weight. So I'm looking around on the Twitter and doing the Twitter thing, and it's like the news of the moment is this absolutely riotous mayhem going on in France. Which is, they're like, this is you could call it riots. It's like, that doesn't do justice. It's acts of war.
Right.
It's war.
Yep.
And it's like, and someone is importing people for this purpose and arming them too.
Well, so you got I love screwing with the French, right? I mean, I just love it.
Well, I know. I want to bring you some small joy today, sir. An opportunity knocks.
The French cannot tolerate that they're not a world power. The French cannot tolerate they're not the leader of Europe, but Germany is. And England is more so. They cannot tolerate the fact that they can like it's like the Jews have a good thing and the French have a good thing. The French made a decision for autarky. In other words, they want to be self-sustaining.
Wait, when was that?
Well, before it's been consistent, but it was certainly because of the oil crisis in the 70s.
So 70s.
And the French falsely believe that the Enlightenment was a major leap for man rather than the empirical Enlightenment was. But the French Enlightenment was actually a fucking disaster, which unleashed the French Revolution, which unleashed the destruction of Europe, which led to Germany retaliation for the French destruction of Europe, which led to the world wars and the destruction of Europe. So I view French and their vanity as the cause of the decline of European civilization. Right? So
that was some severe tail.
Well, I'm also correct. Understand?
I'm not saying you're wrong.
Right.
I'm just like, wow.
So the vanity of the French. Remember, they're cognitively feminine, so of course they have vanity. Yeah, exactly. You saw that coming. That was well done. So the French will never admit they were wrong and never self-correct ever, because just like women will never admit they're wrong and never self-correct. So I view Russia's desperate folly one of pragmatism. In other words, they know their demographic and economic problem, right? They understand their strategy, right? They're just foolish to think they can do it on their own instead of relying with Europe. The real threat to Europe.
Whoa, instead of what?
In other words, the way you
the Russians are the issue is that why Putin did what he did, which was the EU and the Americans won't have it because we're being governed by the feminine.
Well, hold on.
Wait,
it goes both ways.
It's like this. It's like the issue is they're trying to throw down the government of Russia. They want to dominate it from the UN.
No, we want to remove the threat of Russia, which has been persistent. They have never accepted the fall of the Soviet Union. And our belief, this is how we looked at it, and I have some inside knowledge to this. Our belief was that Russia would eventually, because of sheer economic and strategic necessity, integrate with Europe. And then the great boon that would be the unification of German engineering and Russian labor and resources would solve the Eurasia problem. That's what we believe. That was our strategy.
I distance myself from this hour.
Okay, now
I'm regarding this as residues and derivations from the post-war settlement.
That is not however, the WEF and the Jewish financial sector's objective. Right. So our strategic direction is not, and remember, the financial sector, we've not only created a state within a state, we've created an empire across.
Yes.
So this is why a lot of our fixes have to do with finance and economics. Right? A lot of the policies eliminate this ability to create states within states and empires across states that are unaccountable. So you're correct when you say, and so is Martin, when there's a conspiratorial empire trying to bring this about, and that empire is located among Jewish intellectuals in the financial sector in the States. However, there is the Western geostrategic policy outside of those people is that it's just logical that Russia will eventually end this political system because it isn't sustainable, and we can then unify. And so the way the West was looking at this is every time Putin has a hiccup, we thought he was just talking to his audience to maintain domestic domestic approval ratings, which were high, right? And very high, Putin's very high approval ratings. He was doing all this rhetoric for domestic approval ratings, right? And we're operating on the assumption that, well, he's doing it for domestic approval ratings because frankly, their government and their economy aren't doing a very good job. So it's rational he would do that. But the minute he flipped over and invaded, and he says, we're going to even invade Sweden and take over the rest of Europe, then he's like, oh shit, now we've got to get rid of this guy. And so that put the two missions of the people we don't like, this empire, external empire, this unaccountable external financial empire, we put that into concert, in other words, into the same interest as the Western group strategy.
So this you made a novel statement that I've never heard before in any other context, which is that Mr. Putin threatened the Swedes.
You haven't heard that?
Never.
Oh, you should go look. It's real easy. I was there, right? 2014. Yeah. 2015.
I like.
He said He said we can, if we wanted to, we could take over the Poland, the Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Finland, Sweden, and Norway, and there's nothing you could do about it. Now, the book that came out recently, I don't remember when it was, somewhat recently, by a Russian State Department official who's come to I read this book last night. And he says, you don't realize in the West, and we didn't realize in the Russian State Department how corrupt the information hierarchy was in trying to get to Putin and never telling him the truth. And so he became increasingly insulated from reality and living in an informational fantasy world. Okay. And so he really thought his military was strong. He really thought that Ukrainians would fold.
So the issue is quite interesting, which is that there's I regard that as a semi-conspiratorially thinking about the Russians and their functionalities. While I harbor grave suspicions about the Western world being managed by New York bankers.
Well, you think that I have this problem with all conservatives, right? There's a tendency to engage in oneness thinking. This oversimplify a situation so they can feel they can attack the problem directly, because that's what a conservative wants to do, is attack a problem directly. When the issue is, as I explained it, there are multiple motives here. Yes, I haven't discussed half of them. I've just discussed the two major strains, which is the West general strategy for continuing the post-war project, and the change in that strategy as we've learned that the Middle East isn't domesticatable, right? And as we've learned that we need to now focus on a China that went from being a promise of an entry into a global citizen into a hostile global citizen, and Russia saying, wow, we're screwed demographically and economically. Those people are going to hang us if we don't do something. So we have to do what all leaders do, as they become external aggressors in order to maintain internal coherence. I mean, our presidents do it. Everybody does it. That's what everybody does. So I'm just saying these are all competing systems, and the fact that you are focused on one of them is a normal conservative personality trait. But for me, I just look at the system, the world system, working as everybody pursuing their natural interests with the information and resources at their disposal, and there's all these games, He's
Yeah,
got
yeah.
what's going on. And so I'm like, I'm not disagreeing with it. There's this conspiratorial element. What I'm saying is the conspiratorial element had its own ambitions, and whether that would happen or not, I mean, it's certainly spreading the woke bullshit successfully enough. And Russia and the Middle East and the Eastern Europe, they're successfully resisting the woke feminine virus. And so I view it as we need them to help us stop the woke feminine virus, and they need us to help them build up their economies so they don't have to have authoritarian states. But on the other hand, we're not Russia and China. We don't have core populations threatened by the Muslim barbarians in the center of the world, right? Because it's really like that, right? You have this Muslim cancer down in here, and then you have India, which is a decent civilization. China is a distant civilization. Russia is a distant civilization, and over here on this peninsula of Europe, and over across the seas on these big fucking islands called Australia, North America, we've got England, Australia, North America. We've literally got islands, and the world island doesn't. And so we're sitting here in this fortress surrounded by water, and they've got the barbarians literally breeding them like rats at their doorstep. And the barbarians are hostile. Why? Because they can't tolerate the superiority of other civilizations versus Islam, and the low status Islam maintains because of it. They hate believing that their religion tells them they're the best, they're the whatever, they're the gods approved. And the fact is, evidence is all to the contrary. They're actually the worst. So what do you expect them to not double down on what they know? Of course it is. So
wait. So the issue goes like this. It's in the context of current events, right? We're watching the mayhem going on in France. Who released those people for that purpose?
Oh, the French left. That's where all this comes from.
Someone's importing these people, and now they're burning their cities.
Well, France has colonies in Africa among these people. France still maintains its colonial empire, right? I mean, so because of that, there's a natural relationship between the French military, the French military's occupation and management of the French holdings in North Africa. And it's partly why France is less concerned about Russian oil, because it has colonies in there. So France is a colonial power with African influences. They thought that and they believe their own stupid nonsense, right? We've already talked about how the French believe their own stupid nonsense, right? The French are the source of all bad ideas in philosophy and politics.
I swear to God, you challenge my ability to remain calm, to be seen calmly listening to the provocations that is so anti-leftist. It's like, okay, I'm good with that. I'm not saying you're wrong.
I don't say, some portion of leftists are evil and some person of fascists are evil. But in generally, the truth is that people are unhappy for rational reasons. Right? They're just sometimes right and sometimes wrong about how to achieve them.
That's right.
Now, so the difference is the fascists will take responsibility for the capital, and the communists, the left, the feminine, will not take responsibility. They want dependency instead of responsibility. And so you have this French feminine system, which is really the secular preservation of the authority of the Catholic Church, right? That's all the French government is. It's the capture of the administrative and philosophical responsibility and theory of the Catholic Church, and they killed all their nobility, right? So of course that's all they've got is the church aristocracy, and so the Catholics, they're a feminine Catholic, feminine Christian, no, not Christian, feminine Catholic state with that invented this absolute ridiculous nonsense we call the French Enlightenment, which is the mother of communism, right? Of the mother, it's the mother of Kantian Russian, German Kantian nonsense and Jewish communist nonsense, right? This is so France created this stuff, we didn't, right? And so France is the country to blame, and they're still doubling down on it. So of course, I look back at the world history, and I'm like, well, the person you kill is Napoleon, right? Or Robespierre, because Hitler would never happen. Right?
Hitler's not the problem.
Hitler's not the problem.
Oh my word. Oh my, you're really energetic, Kurt. I
well,
like
you're energetic, and it's a feedback loop. I don't know.
It's positive, man. It's
positive feedback loop.
Very good. It's very good. So it's a very interesting moment we're witnessing. And
yeah, but what's going to happen? You know, I mean, if you know, I see the Europeans continuing to move right. All right, because they're going to have to, because there's no choice.
Good Lord, I don't know how you could be French and tolerating this nonsense going on in your cities.
Oh, we wouldn't tolerate it if we had if the states were dominant instead of the federal government. The federal government can get away with this.
But see, that we witnessed this too this week was the Supreme Court did devolve the power back to the states again with this affirmative action finding. And it's like it's moving that direction. It is, but it's just big wheels moving slow.
Well, that's the virtue and the limit of our world, which is a post hoc legal system, and the French world, which I would love to have this debate with Peter Zeihan. If anybody knows I could have this debate with Peter Zeihan, I would love to have it.
That's calling you out, Peter?
Well, it's not because I'm positive I'm right, you realize. It's because I know I could actually have the debate with him, and it wouldn't be a waste of my oxygen.
Sorry, continue, please.
It's just because I can't have the debate with anybody, because it's a waste of oxygen. You have to have somebody who's at least, you know, up here, and he's better than I am, right? So I mean, I need somebody to have this conversation with, because you know he's more of a center left kind of guy, and I'm a center right kind of guy, right? Yeah. That's my world. So I'm less optimistic about human behavior, despite what our guys to the right of me all think is that I'm the most optimistic. Anyway, so
I find that to be very amusing too, by the way.
Yes. So look at the European model, which is it's called continental law, but it's Napoleonic law.
Yeah.
Right. And so the French are a low trust people. The English were a high trust people. And so Napoleon couldn't trust the judges to actually adhere to laws he issued. So he had to write this stuff out top down and create a top down legal system, just like the Jews created a top down legal system. So that's continental. Well, and so that's why in Europe they have a regulatory state.
Yes.
Because you couldn't trust anybody. Whereas Americans were trustworthy because the English were trustworthy, because the Americans were largely English, and those that were largely German. And if you have Germans and English, which is both Germanic and West Germanic populations, what's the difference? Like a little bit of language, right? German being is the very bizarre grammatical construct that it is. Anyway, so what happened was that they created a regulatory system there because you couldn't trust people, and so it's a propter hoc system. That's the wrong word. You have to solve things, have to be fixed before they can be done. Whereas in America, we have a forgiving system, which is you better do it right, because the flip side legal system is not fun. Right. The same thing has to do with our government. Their governments rule. Our governments decide. Right. So our governments are set up to debate. They're not set up to rule. They're set up to debate, to find concurrency between the states. Right. In other words, we can only enact. It's basically a marketplace where our politicians from across the states can negotiate for the benefit of the states. Right. And we have to have concurrency among the states, right, which is both by population and by number, which is the genius of our system. Right. It creates concurrency. Right? The British system did it by nobility and landowners, which is basically businessmen, right? The farmers are businessmen. And so the British did the same thing with population. And the Greeks did the same thing with the Senate and the, what's it called? Roman Senate. It's escaping me right now. Same thing with the Greeks, right? The plebeians, whatever.
Yes.
Right. So what you have is you have a responsibility hierarchy. So what happens though is in the United States, so we can do all this innovation, experimentation, whatever, because there's no prior constraint on what we do. We don't have to just prove that we're going to be good people before we do something. We just pay a bitchy high effing cost if we do something bad, right? So that's why all the innovation happens in America and not in Europe. It's why we have a more dynamic system. It's why we adapt more quickly. However, the problem in Europe is this high-mindedness and this centralization of authority. European government can rule, right? They actually can rule. They don't have the Constitution that we have. They don't have the Supreme Court to correct it when it gets out of hand like we do. And that's because our Constitution is actually natural law. It's actually science. The other ones are wishful thinking. It's actually a joke to read other countries' constitutions. Yeah. I swear, I must have read 100 different constitutions from different countries, right? They're comic books. Australia's is good. And they're still screwed because whatever. So what we've got is the Supreme Court and this natural law and the right of judicial review. So if the Congress isn't sovereign, the people are sovereign. The people are sovereign under natural law, and the Congress is bound by natural law. What went wrong is we pulled the Senate directly elected instead of having the Senate be representatives of the government. Yeah. Right.
That's was intentional grounding.
It was intentionally done to undermine the states and concentrate power in the federal government. So that's where we went wrong. And the second one where we went wrong is that a lot of these amendments, really the 14th in particular, have broken the primacy of the states and moved our government closer to the European model of
that was the intention.
And that was the intention of it. Just like we need to stack the Supreme Court by the governments. Why? Because they want to create a central government that can rule instead of a market where states can agree or disagree on the production of commons, and then they can say, well, if you don't want to do it, I'm going to do it here, as long as it doesn't violate these basic rights. And then because rights aren't defined as thoroughly as we define them, they're able to make up rights.
Yes.
And so Europe, we have a huge advantage over Europe. In that we're resistant to this Marxist left thing, right? More so than Europe is.
Okay.
And so, whereas so what's happening is Europe tried to mirror the United States by creating the EU because they wanted that centralization of power. France did. It's France that wants that. It's nobody else that wants it. It's France that wants that. Right? If France wants to rule Europe the way Washington, D.C. rules the United States. What's happening is both of these projects, the EU project and the American federal project, are collapsing at the same time.
Yes.
Right? And they're collapsing because the momentum that's built both of these governments, these central governments, was built on presumptions that existed in the 19th century and the early 20th century that no longer exist. And so
exhaustion of opportunity for that to work.
We've exhausted that opportunity for that to work. And so Europe evolved faster than the rest precisely because it was small homogeneous ethno-states. America evolved faster than the rest because it took that Germanic model of the states and started that way. The only weird thing that happened to us was that the continent's really big, and so we got we had a huge territory to open up, right? With the Louisiana Purchase mostly, but it was natural after that. And Europe was overpopulation, and it was overpopulated by the suppression of the underclass and the expansion of the middle class genetics into the population as underemployed labor. So we could take all those Germans who just couldn't get land and move them here, right? And they could get land, and all of a sudden, boom. Right? The same thing happened with my ancestors and Rudyard's ancestors, the Quakers, is that they came over here because they were the professional class in England. They came over here, and all of a sudden they weren't constrained by nobility ripping them off and the state ripping them off and others. Right. And they could take advantage of these waves of immigrants to profit from and whatever. So this happened. So this project is exhausting, right? This project of federalization is exhausting. Why? For the same reason Russia and China are resisting. They're doubling down on empires. What's the actual desire of those territories inside of Russia and China? They want freedom. They want local sovereignty for local self-determination. Okay. So the desire is for federations. So what happened by not finishing the First World War, not finishing with Patton, and not finishing with MacArthur in Asia, is we prolonged the need for another world war to finish the destruction of empires and the restoration of nation states, which is the natural evolution of the optimum for every polity, because you can only redistribute in nation states and small homogeneous nation states. But you need to be civilized enough to cooperate with other nation states, and that requires empires.
Wait, say that again. You need to be civilized enough to cooperate with other nation states.
Yes.
Why does that require empires?
Because that's the problem of what Russia and China are facing. They need to domesticate people who are still basically tribes.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And the reason you get to work as a nation state is you have high internal trust and institutions. And then because you have high internal trust, you can enforce trades across groups that haven't higher internal
trust. The issue in my mind is that there's no need to end the age of empire prematurely, because the civilizational process is not complete.
I think I tried to say that earlier, and I guess I failed. Russia and China have a real problem. Yeah. We have to recognize they have a real problem, but they also have to recognize that they can only solve their problem by leaving alone the civilizations that are frankly more advanced than the people they're domesticating.
I understand that. I understand. So see, the issue in my mind is like,
excuse me, let me finish. Like a parent, you should be raising your children to live without you. And neither the Russians, who are a corrupt gangster elite, and the Chinese, who are a vast corrupt gangster elite, want to do that because they lose all their privileges. Just like our gangster elite, we're developing one, we have a gangster.
I think you underestimate how developed they are.
So our gangster elite, which is the credentialed class, is doing the same thing. We're trying to stop them. That's it.
So so you say the French are going autarkic, and I think that's fairly accurate. I think that's what the direction is that we're headed.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to watch. And so
it's only because just China and Russia. Otherwise, in other words, China has made it so that two things happen. We allowed Europe not to spend money on defense and to put it into social programs. Right?
Yeah.
This created an envy between our domestic population and their populations. So we paid for world defense of transport and trade, and at the cost of our people having social programs. Europe escaped the cost of defending world transport and trade in order to have social programs. This created a conflict between both of us. However, we could have easily made, and we did, Trump started to make Europe pay, and Russia now has convinced them that they have to pay for their defense. And you can see that what our administration is doing is you first. Our administration in the US is saying, okay, you first, Europe.
To do
right?
what?
To force them. We're still supplying a lot of stuff, but we're forcing them
to defend themselves.
To defend themselves. And so Russia and China gave us this opportunity to force this with Europe. Now, the problem is, without the rise of China, if Russia had decided to be good world citizens instead, right? It would have been, but they didn't. They didn't decide. They decided to double down on retaining the privilege of being domestic empires. And so they aren't engaging in the world system, the world system we've made. China was obviously benefiting from it more than any other country.
Yeah.
At the expense of our working classes. Thank you very much.
But it's the exhaustion of this global empire.
Try that again.
Well, there's the exhaustion of the 20th century. I call it the post-war liberal settlement, which is the 20th century settlement. It exhausted the opportunity, and the Chinese and the Russians they're like, that's not going to work.
The Chinese and Russian government saying that's not going to work.
Yes, yes.
China would be far better off without the Communist Party, and Russia would be far better off.
Just like we would be better off without the Leninists running this place.
Exactly.
And you're in the Leninists running Europe. It's like, so it's like this. It's like the meme coming up on the kind of interesting to watch the whole ebb and flow of consciousness on Twitter. And it's like the meme coming up is Weimar problems breed Weimar solutions.
Exactly.
And I'm like this. I said, watching the mayhem going on in France, I'm like, beware of the Weimar solutions being offered by the people who offer them, because they will ensnare you,
yes,
as well as stop the problem. And that's my caveat. So I watch these things, and I'm like, with disinterest in some way, okay? Which is to say, like, my opinion on the Ukraine war is of little significance. My opinion on what I do to organize locally to resolve the pieces of the sky falling together, that's what's interesting to me. Because it's like, how do we move? What's that?
Division of labor. So let's have to work. So we have to work.
That's right.
We all work at the scales that we are comfortable and successful working.
The interesting function that I've run into in this Twitter environment is this English, way more English than I expected, and they're chafing about the immigration, and the end of that, how the empire is watching the French, right, and the French shipping guys up in boats to England. Like, wow, it's just very interesting moment to observe.
Well, it's everybody's, I mean, even Armstrong came out again and said something the other day. So everybody's saying the same thing, 2025, 2030.
What?
It's going to blow up. It has to.
What's that mean? What is it, and what does blow up mean?
Whatever the normative or consensus or habitual normative perception of how the world can and should work will shift, just like it's shifting now. And so what you're saying is, what I believe will happen is, we'll have Weimar solutions. Right? I would prefer that we didn't have Weimar solutions. I'd rather we have British solutions or Anglo solutions. We could put up a new constitution and we solve the damn problem.
I think we can do it.
And so I think that's what our mission is. Because otherwise, you know, there's going to be a lot of bloodshed. And while I'm all for skull pyramids, there's because there's so much joy and the catharsis that comes from it. So much opportunity from the rapid decrease in the volume of population. Right? So then that would be great. But the reality is that when you have a bloody revolution, it's very hard to recover unless you're German. And they tend to be very, very hard. So, I mean, what I would prefer is, of course, we come to some agreement. And we've proposed a solution.
I said, no, that's right. And I like that as a wrapping, because I say it like this, is like Weimar solutions, you can't solve, it goes to Weimar solutions solve Weimar problems. Okay. But that's third generation warfare that we're talking about. Yep. That's also we're in 5.
We're in 5
generation now. So it's like, this is like that Weimar solutions cannot solve this problem.
That's a very smart. Wow. I got to think about that one, because that's probably true, isn't it?
It's like, it's the thing that caused the problem, maybe Weimar, but we're beyond Weimar. You have to get to the next level of thinking in order to resolve the problem created by the prior problem maker.
The issue is the Weimar was a less brutal solution than the one that would be result now. Yes. Well, I didn't think about that before. I thought about it as what are the conditions, what's the field of opportunities for the construction of a civil war in the United States for the control of this particular issue? And every time I do it, of course, I think of how you would fight this on different levels. And of course, it would be the military is useless at that scale. There's only 3 cities that have police forces that are not useless at any scale. And so the question is whether the National Guard and the military, how would they turn? Because they're going to split, right? And the minute the military gets involved on that, or the civil guard, then it's all over. Because as I keep telling people, I mean, you just don't understand. When the minute your government shoots at you, you win. It's all over for your government. It's all over. So, you know, so I keep looking at this and saying, well, and especially for the United States, because we are our legitimacy domestically drives a lot of our legitimacy internationally. And the minute we lose internal legitimacy, our financial sector and our legal system lose legitimacy. When that happens, the miracle's over. So for me, it was a fairly easy way this pretty easy exercise, which others have done, is to say, how would you conduct a civil war in the United States? So, well, I mean, it's really obvious. And it's really obvious how, I mean, there's the field of opportunities is really obvious. How you play those moves is opportunistic. But it's just very hard to see a government this lacking in legitimacy, ours lacking legitimacy to survive. People are economically comfortable, but the government's not. Yeah, they're economically comfortable enough right now, but the government doesn't have legitimacy, right? And the government doesn't have legitimacy because we let the left get out of hand. So we're going to need a Weimar solution, so to speak, because if the left, we cannot allow the left to destroy.
No,
we this need a country like it's destroyed every other.
Right. There will be a solution. We're generating the solutions that are acceptable.
I think a lot, I couldn't think about that stuff for a while because of my health, but the better my health recovers, the more my emotional and life psychological durability for working through those category of problems is easy.
Yes.
Which I don't see anything has changed really. All it's changed is they've decreased the ability to use social media as an organizing method. So we sort of missed our window. We missed the Wild West window for the internet.
Now it's a more regulated environment is all it is.
Well, they're going to keep going. I mean, were they trying to pass this law about regulating? I mean, you can't do that in the United States. There's no way you get a government truth bureau, because there's no way that the government has the capacity to determine what the truth is.
Well, it's interesting. So that it kind of goes to this latest Supreme Court finding about the affirmative actions, that the Supreme Court says you can't do that nonsense.
And oh, by the way, you see what Roberts wrote in there? He said, and by the way, if you're not gonna be able to circumvent this. I don't know if
the president's talking about circumventing it. And it's like, all right. It's like, okay, lawlessness, is it? Okay. And it's okay. We put up with a lot of minor indignities and it's okay. Kurt, I want to thank you for this day. We did a good job, I think.
We did. So tomorrow we get to work?
We can work.
We can work tomorrow. I'm excited.
Now I'm gonna get 3 books. We some very good conversation today. I appreciated it.
Well, it's because we're both got some energy. All right, love you, brother.
All right,
like, subscribe, hit the bell, leave comments. Tell me if you learn anything interesting in this one.
Right. Wait. Take notes. I do. Kurt, I'll see you same time, same channel tomorrow.
Love you. And thanks to everybody who follows us.
Bye-bye.